Simon & Schuster Audio presents Glenn Beck's Common Sense, the case against an out-of-control government, inspired by Thomas Paine. By Glenn Beck with Joseph Carey. Read by Glenn Beck.
A note from the author. 235 years ago, a British citizen with only a basic education set off to make a new life for himself in the British colonies. For 2 years, he worked hard and watched as his fellow colonists grew tired of British oppression. Then, he decided to act. Using his contacts in the publishing industry, Thomas Paine anonymously released a pamphlet that made the case for revolution using extraordinarily logical, straightforward, indisputable arguments. He called it Common Sense. Once Paine put his feelings into words, he realized he wasn't alone. Only 7 months passed between the release of Common Sense in January 1776 and the signing of the Declaration of Independence. 7 months, a pinpoint in the history of time, but a moment that put the colonies on an irreversible track towards revolution and ultimately freedom. 7 months that changed the world forever. Today, we find ourselves back in 1776. But this time, our path forward isn't so clear-cut. The abuses being perpetrated by our government are just as obvious now as they were then. But instead of rising up with a collective voice, we sit idly by and watch as our hard-won freedoms slowly dissolve into a puddle of apathy, political correctness, and outright corruption. We feel helpless and alone as we hear confusing debates over obscure issues play out on the airwaves daily. But that is the lie. The infighting and the purposeful division promoted by our political parties is simply a ploy to keep us from uniting. After all, a citizenry that fights among itself over petty differences is too busy to notice the real cause of its problems. As you hear the details of this immense harm that both parties have done to our country, you might find yourself wondering what could be done to change our course. I lay out several options, but I want to be clear that none of them includes violence. Thomas Paine and his fellow revolutionaries shed their blood so that future generations would have access to weapons immeasurably stronger than muskets or bayonets, the weapons of democracy. Those are the tools that we will use to usher in a second American Revolution, a revolution that won't be fought on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of the 300 million people lucky enough to call America home. Over the years, many revolutionaries have used sharp tongues instead of sharp knives, and the results have been extraordinary. Martin Luther King Jr., for instance, once said to his supporters, "The question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. The nation and the world are in dire need of creative extremists." It was inflammatory language, but he meant that it was much easier to simply die for a cause than it is to find inventive, effective means to fight for it. Violence is the easy way out, but it is also a sure path to discrediting everything you stand for, something that those opposed to him found out the hard way. Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time, King said, while accepting the Nobel Prize. He continued, "Man must overcome oppression and violence without resorting to oppression and violence. Man must evolve, for all human conflict, a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love." History has proven that King was right. And so, our new revolution of thought begins right now, with you. Thomas Paine was an unremarkable man living in a remarkable time. He proved that it doesn't take celebrity or stature or wealth to make a difference. It only takes someone willing to say the things that need to be said. Well, I'm no Thomas Paine. He was an extraordinary writer, a renowned motivator, and a heroic patriot. But the words that follow also must be said, if for no other reason than to ease my own conscience. If you believe that it's time to put principles above parties, character above campaign promises, and common sense above all, then I ask you to listen to this book, declare yourself a creative extremist, and then pass these words along to others who may agree with something else that Martin Luther King Jr. once said. The hottest place in hell is reserved for those who remain neutral in times of great moral conflict. Do not remain neutral. Do not sit idly by. Do not let others speak for you. Silence has gotten us nowhere. So it is once again time for our collective voice to make a simple yet powerful demand. Don't tread on me.